All right, good morning. Today is day 10 of the JavaScript stack. We are in full stack. So, what I would like to do this morning is take a bit of a step back and start from the beginning. I promise I'm not going to type it all out, but I want to show you and clarify like I'm starting from scratch. Like you're getting ready to start learning with books too, right? Today's assignment. Where do you start? Where do you even begin? Okay. So the platform goes through the structure of our full stack application, and it does a pretty good job. There's a lot of, tutorialized, you can follow along. But what I've done and what I want to go through is making sure you guys are able to do this. Okay. So in terms of pacing, I technically could finish everything today that you need for the exam, but I think I want to slow it down a little bit, make sure that everybody's on pace. And that because there's no reason for me to rocket forward if everybody's, if people are behind. Okay. So my plan is to go over full stack today. We'll talk about validations on Monday. And then the belt exam is next Wednesday. Next week, we'll talk more about what the exam entails. This belt exam, I think, is I shouldn't make blanket statements, but I think this is probably the easiest of all of the stacks. Okay, so it's really very straightforward in terms of getting a red belt. And black belt features we'll talk more about next week. I want to cover the basics first, and we'll talk about, because I know some of you want to go for that black belt, and that's awesome. But I want to make sure everybody's got the basics first. Okay. So what I'm going to do is show you what I've got set up. Let me go back here. So what I've done is if you go to our GitHub repository, Christian, yeah, no relationships, only single model. So I always make the joke, it's probably dumb, but relationships are hard, right? Relationships are hard in life. They're also hard in coding. So no relationships to worry about makes it a lot easier. Anyway, what I have in our repository is this checklist.md. So essentially, this is and I hope that's not zoomed out too far. I have like a bulleted list of our file structure. So we're going to have a client folder and a server folder. That's pretty much all that's going to be in the root. Okay. There's the git ignore. You can add that as well. But that's only for if we're pushing to GitHub. So I'm going to go through setting up this structure. So again, this you can copy if you go to the raw. Is it raw? Yeah. You can get the code that I'm going to go over in class or that I'm going to go over in the demonstration. You can use this if you want. I suggest you understand the structure, understand what's going on, but I'm going to demonstrate how this will work if you want to use this. Okay, so going back to our application. So I'm going to go into lecture. This is day 10. I'm going to make a new let me stop and back up. I'm going to make a React application, right? A full stack application. What's the first thing I need to do? I know I sound like a broken record, but
npm create.
Before that,
you need your root directory.
Right. So we need a directory that's going to house both our client and our server. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go into day 10. I'm going to make my folder. Just out of consistency, I'm going to make a demos folder. And then inside of here, I'm going to make the repository the folder that's going to hold my application. Okay. So I'm going to call it full stack demo. Okay. I'm going to take my checklist and I'm going to copy it and I'm going to paste it into that folder. Okay. So now I have my checklist in place. I have my full stack demo. So I'm going to open this in a new directory just because it's easier for me to see. You know, if you're able to operate without doing this, it's totally fine. But what I have to do and what I recommend is open this in a new Visual Studio Code window. Okay, so I'm going to open this up. Okay, then I'm going to move this because I'm going to need it later. There we go. Okay, so I've got my checklist. So if I go into my checklist, I've got a client, a server, and git ignore. Okay. So this is basically, I know it's kind of hard to see with the markdown structure, but the root is just this, right? Full stack demo is the root of my application. Inside the root, I'm going to have a client and a server. Okay, so let's do the client first. Okay, so if I open up my integrated terminal, I'm inside the directory. If I'm ever confused, I can always do ls. And as long as I see what I type out here matches here, I know that I'm in the right place. Okay. So, Luke, now what do we do?
Now npm create
There you
v
go.
at latest.
Now we do npm create Vite at latest.
Nailed it.
Cool. Okay, and I'm gonna. What do I name my project? This is very important.
If you want it to be your current directory, you can just put the dot.
If I want it to, right? If I want it to be my current directory, I want to put the dot. But I'm going to be making. I'm going to do it differently than I've done it before, right? So the way you guys are probably going to do it. So I want to make client is going to be my front end. So I can just call my project client. Okay. So what I was doing before is I was making the client directory, changing into it, and then saying dot. This is the other way to go about it. I'm in my root. I'm in the application I'm going to be building. So I want a client folder and a server folder. So the client is just our React application. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, cool. So my project name is client. I'm going to use React, obviously. Okay. So now I have my client directory. That is my React application. I can open it up. And so now if I know I can double check and make super duper certain that I'm in the right place, I have these links to the various folders that are in this, the various folders and files that are in this application. So if I click this, if I hold down Control and try to go to my app.js, it takes me to my app.js. Okay, so I know that if this comes up and says unknown file or something like that, I know I'm in the wrong place. Okay, does that that's helpful? Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, so let me close this up. So I'm going to go back to my checklist, open up my terminal again. So I didn't finish making the application. What's the next thing I need to do?
You go into the folder and then install your dependencies.
Yeah, so cd into client. npm, I can run npm install. That will get my all the dependencies that are built into Vite. But what else do I need to install in my React application? There's a couple dependencies we've been using so far. Does anybody remember what they are?
There's Axios.
Axios is one. What else?
The router one.
Exactly. Yep.
Is.
React router DOM. Okay, so those are the two dependencies we need for our client. So I'm going to run that. So that'll go out and install. If I open up my package.json quick enough, it'll show, we should see the dependencies appear here. So I've got React and React DOM. Those automatically come with Vite. So my node modules folder appeared. And there's Axios is installed and React Router DOM is installed. Okay. So going back to our checklist, first thing I did, I've already created my directory. I've already created my React application. The next thing I need to do is install dependencies. Okay. And that just means doing what I just did. So I'm going to up arrow to get the command I just ran. No. Try to copy it like that. There we go. Okay, so this is just, you don't type the $sign. I think you guys know that. All right, so that's the next step, right? Install dependencies. Okay. What should I do next?
Now you made a server folder.
Yeah. So we could go in and mess around with our client, but probably better to get the server set up first. So I'm going to go up here to my checklist. And again, if the file structure is confusing, and I shouldn't say if, the fact that the file structure is confusing, we can use this as our guide. So if I close up client, go into server, I'm going to need all of these. So I'm going to need a config directory, a controllers directory, model directory, routes, and most importantly, I'm going to need server.js. Okay. So what I've done in my markdown file is I've set up the link. And again, if my checklist is here in the root, then this link will take me to, and basically take me to the file and where it needs to be. So I've said, make a, link to dot, which is the current directory, inside of a server directory, make server.js. Okay. So if I hold down control and click on this, it's going to say unable to open server.js. Would you like me, to create it for you, right? So if I click create file, it's automatically going to create the proper file structure. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. We just got a quick poll. Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Nice. Cool. Okay. Awesome. And poll share results. Cool. Okay. Some of the feedback I've got was I take too many polls. So I try not to do it as often. I apologize for that. Okay. So what should I do next? So one thing I want to point out with this, what I've done is I've configured this. I'm thinking in advance. I'm thinking forward, like I've got this just a generic word thing here, right? So the thing could be a recipe, could be a book, it could be, whatever's on the belt exam. So if I want to set up my file structure and have it be whatever the item is, right? Whatever our resource is, I can take this, and I tried the best I could come up with was thing. We're hardly ever going to keep track of a thing, right? So we're going to keep track of something more meaningful. So I can say Control F. And the way Control F works is, if you haven't seen this before, I'm going to type in the word that I want to replace. And then if I click this little caret. I don't know what this is called, little clicky lever thingy. I want to replace thing with recipe. Okay, because that's what I've been keeping track of. That's the resource I've been using. That's the code that I have already written that I don't want you guys to have to watch me type out again. So if I just do, I'm basically saying everywhere you see thing, replace it with recipe. Okay, then I just click this button. This will replace all. And now I have it set up to, if I click these files, it's going to make my, sorry, it's going to make the recipe model, the recipe controller, and all that stuff. Okay. Does anybody have questions about that? Okay. All right. So let me, I think what I'm going to do now, instead of, I think you guys get the idea with this. I'm just going to copy over what I did yesterday so you guys don't have to watch me type it out. So I need a, give me just 1 second. Okay, I got to find what I did yesterday. There it is. Okay. Actually, I think I'm just going to go ahead and do this. So I'm going to say, I've got this set up to make readmes in each of them. If you want to do that, you can. If you know, you can just make a readme and take notes as to what it does, but I'll leave that to you. If you want to take detailed notes, you know, whatever works better for you is what my goal is. So I'm going to I've created my server. So what I'm going to do is go to what I did yesterday. I can just copy it over. Okay. I left these in here. They're in the other file, so I'm going to delete them from here. So they're on they're on my repo. So I'm going to take these out here just to, so we don't have as much clutter. Okay. So just to reiterate, we're importing Express, we're importing the router, DB Connect, that's our Mongoose connection. And then the cores is for cross origin. I always forget the R and the S, but so we can have allow our React application to talk to our Express application. Okay. Next, I'm going to do the Mongo config folder or directory. I'm going to go in, take that, paste that here. Okay, so I've got this. We'll also set up the .env. I want to make sure that we do it the way the platform is doing it. I just did this kind of shorthand just to get it working. So let me get all the files over. Okay, so now we need a controller. So recipe controller, I'm going to click make the file. Please interrupt me if you have any questions about anything, if you want me to cover anything we talked about. Okay, so I have everything in here from before. This is the old, when we were doing the dummy database. This is the new Mongo. I also included the update and delete in here. We didn't talk about it directly, but I put the code in there just so so everything works properly. Okay, so I've got my controllers, I've got my config. Now I need my model. So I'm going to create my model folder. Take the code from yesterday. Okay. Now I need my routes. So I'm going to create the routes. Okay, and all right. And now we're at the, oh, I forgot. What do I need to do in here? What do I need to do in package.json? Actually, I forgot a step. What do I need to do now? I want to configure my server. What did I forget to do? If I try to go to package.json, it's not there, right? So how do I get package.json?
Would you have to import it?
Not important. So if I'm going to CD, actually, I'm going to leave this. I'm going to make a new terminal window. So right now, if I look at my file structure, I have my checklist, my client, my server, right? The server, we've installed the dependencies for our client, right? We installed Axios, we installed React Router DOM. The server also has dependencies though, right? What do we need to install on our server?
Is that npm init y?
There you go. There you go. Yep. So we need to set up our server as a npm package, right? So I'm going to change into my server. So I'm again, ls, I can see my client, my server. I want to perform the operations inside the server directory, right? So I want to set it up as a npm package. So I need to change into it. So cd into server. Okay, so now I'm in my server directory. Now, like Tyler said, we need to do npm init, and then the -y just accepts all the defaults for the npm init. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, so as soon as I hit enter, it's going to go through, create my package.json. So now when I try to link to this, it's there. Okay, so the server, the package.json is set up in both my server and my client. What do I need to do in here? There's a couple of modifications I need to make.
The type modular.
Exactly. We want to be able to use the new ES6 module import system. So in order to do that, we need to say the type is module. Okay. Also, we want to add the script so we don't have to keep running nodemon, right? npm nodemon or start. So I can add that right here. I can make start. That way, when I start my server, it's npm start. But if you want to use the same command for both of them, we just add a dev script, and it's npx nodemon. Okay, that way in here, once we don't have our dependencies yet, but once we do, we can just say npm run dev, and it'll start both our server. Well, it's the same command to start our server and our client. Okay. What do I need to do now?
Next, you install the npm save nodemon. Save dev nodemon.
npm install. So we're going to need a couple dependencies in here. So let's take a look at the platform, see what we need. I'm not seeing it. It's in the previous one. Nope. I could have sworn it was in configure. Did I just miss it? Okay, I can't find it. So I know what it is. So we need to install Express, Mongoose, Cores, and the one we haven't done yet together is the .env. Okay, so those are we need those dependencies. We're also going to need NodeMon, but I'm going to do that as a separate install. So we need Express because that's the library we're using for our server. Mongoose so we can connect to our database. Cores for cross-site connections, and then .env. Okay, which I'll demo this in a minute. Okay, so I'm going to install those dependencies. Okay, so I'll make a note of here. We need to install server dependencies. Okay, and it's the one I just did. Okay, now we also need NodeMon. Oops. Okay, so it's npm install -- save -dev NodeMon. Okay, so if I check my package.json, I've got a dev dependency of NodeMon. My core dependencies are cores, .env, Express, and Mongoose. Okay, so let me add that. Ah. Copy. Okay. Any questions so far? Is this helpful? Does it feel like, I mean, is it good to review this? Do you guys feel like it's pretty good? Okay, cool. Thank you, Z. Thank you, Tyler. Cool. Okay. What do I need to do now? I think I'm going to start it up, see if it works. So how do I do that? How do I start? I want to have my development server running for my client, and I want to have my development server running for my server, right? So how do I start? How do I start the application?
npm run dev.
npm run dev for both, right? So we could just do over here, we're going to do npm run dev. Make sure you're inside of the client directory, right? So if you try to run this and you're not in the right directory, it's not going to work. Okay, so my development server for React is running. There we go. Okay, so now I need to do the same thing. I want my so it's npm run dev here. Okay. It's taken a long time, but there we go. Okay, so I'm going to go to my browser. I have on port 5173, I have my React application running. I'm also going to check, make sure that my server's running. So what port is my server running on?
8,000, right? Or 5,000.
8,000, right? Yeah. By the way, I made this bookmark with all the different ports I use, and it's a life changer. It's like not having to type that in is, anyway, I like it. I recommend it. Okay, so it's saying /get doesn't exist, which that is not an accident. It doesn't. So my root for my server is /API/recipes. Okay, and the misspelled hamburgers is still there. Okay, let's add a couple more just for fun. So I'm going to post. Close this up so I have more room. Anybody have a recipe they like?
Stroganoff.
Oh, I'm afraid to try to spell that. Help me out. How do you spell it?
I'm on the same boat. I do not know how to spell it.
I got you.
It's
Pretty much
delicious.
how it sounds.
Yeah, STROGANOFF.
0EAN
No E, just A. Yeah.
Stroganoff. Cool. It's like noodles and meat, right?
You can have noodles, but it's more like cheese and meat, and it's like creamy onions. It's
Ooh.
delicious.
Yeah, it's got a really good cream sauce. More on the more savory than like Alfredo kind of stuff.
It's nice. You guys are making me hungry. Okay, cheese, meat, sauce. Really good.
Perfect.
Cool. Okay, so now we got our title, our description. I don't need any more than that, right? Because if I go to my model, all I need is title and description. The ID is going to be taken care of by Mongo Mongoose. The timestamp is going to be taken care of because I've set my timestamp to true. So all I need is this. All I need is the title, description, and it works. Okay, so now I should be able to go back to my browser, refresh, and now we've got 2 recipes. Cool. Any questions so far? Okay. I haven't. Next time, let's keep going. Okay. So let's get at least to the point where we were yesterday. So what do I need to change now? I've got my server running. It appears to be working. I mean, I didn't do a thorough test, but if we hit any snags, we can fix them later on. What do I need to do? What's the first thing I need to update in my client? Like, what do I need to do? Where should I start here? And there's no right or wrong answer. It's just, whatever you guys think.
You're gonna need a components folder, right?
I'm going to need a components folder. Yeah. So I already have that set up. So if I click this link, it's going to create my components folder with a header. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm going to rename this to navbar. Okay, so I got my components. I also don't like that. I don't dislike it. I just don't need it, right? So I'm going to take out all this stuff. Actually, let's start over. Okay, just got my app component. And so I've got my nav bar, I've got my app. How do I render my nav bar? Actually, let's make a nav bar. Sorry. RAN. So let's take a quick look at our client. We got app there, which is this here. So I wanted to say nav bar. Right, I want to get this to render.
You would import it in the app.
I need to import it. Import my navbar. And then render it as a component in here. Okay. There, now we're seeing navbar. So I want to mimic recipes, right? So I want to have, I didn't get a chance, I didn't pull up the wireframe, but basically when we first log in, we want to display a table with all of our recipes, right? So when the user goes to /, right, the first thing they see should be my table of recipes. So I want my navbar. I also want, well, talking about the navbar, what else do we need to add? What are some of the dependencies we installed? We need to make use of those, right? Remember, we want to set up our routes, right? So we want to set up, eventually we want to get to the point where we show a table of recipes. They click on an individual recipe. We go to the individual show page. We want to be able to edit a recipe, create a recipe, and so on, right? So we need to set up all, excuse me, we need to set up all those routes. How do I do that? Where do I put my routing functionality? Route, okay, so good. Thank you, Devin. So the routes folder. Now this is where we need to make a distinction between client-side routing and server-side routing. Okay, so don't get confused between these routes and the routes we're going to have in our client. Okay. The routes we have, whoops, I went with wrong one. The routes in here are for our API, right? So if I go back to the browser, /recipes, this is a server route, right? We want to talk about client-side route. So if I go to here, if I go to /recipes, it's going to display all my recipes, or just /. If I go to /recipes /new, right? I want to display a form to add a recipe. So we have client-side routes and server-side routes. The server-side routes are just the APIs we're going to access using Axios. For our client side, we're going to use our React Router DOM. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions about that? I hope I didn't misunderstand your statement, Devin. Were you talking about that routes folder, like the routes folder in Express?
No, you nailed it. I was just wrong. Thank
Okay,
you.
no. I'm. I mean, it's good to be wrong, right? That's how we learn. So I'm hoping that didn't offend you. I didn't mean anything by that. Cool. Okay, so we need to set up our client-side routes. Okay, so we're going to use our React Router DOM. So I'm going to import some of the dependencies we're going to need from React Router DOM. Okay. So remember, we have the browser router. We need routes and route. I think that's all for now. So I want my entire application to have access to my routing functionality, right? So I want the nav bar to be able to have links that route. I want, basically I want them available everywhere. So I'm going to wrap the entire application in the browser router. Okay. So now everything that I put within this component, its children are going to have access to the React Router DOM functionality. Okay. So I've got my nav bar. I'm going to also set up my routes. Did I misspell it? I sure did. Sorry, I'm a horrible typist. There we go. Cool. So the first route we want is just the /, right? Just our regular route. So I'm going to say, sorry, a route. It's going to be self-closing. So the route is going to take a path, which in this case, I just want a path that goes to /. And then it's going to take an element. Okay. The element is the component that I want to render when the user goes to that path. Okay. So I'm thinking I'm just going to call it home. Doesn't really matter. You can call it recipes. You can call it whatever makes the most sense to you. But I'm going to put this component in a folder called views. And why is it mad at me? Oh, because I don't have an element yet. Okay. So I'm going to make a new folder called views. And inside of views, I'm going to make a home component, home.jsx. Okay. And I'm just going to put the dummy code there just so we can get it working. Move this over here. Okay. So what I want is when we go to /, I want to render this home component. So I'm just going to basically stick the component in here. But first, I'm going to remember to import it. So I'm going to import home. And Visual Studio Code should be able to help you out with its location. So I just type in home. It knows that it looks in views and looks for home. Okay, then I'm going to put that component in here. Okay, so now let's, oh. Oh, it sweeps one anew. What am I doing here? What the heck did I do? Okay, sorry about that. There we go. So we have our nav bar and our home component. Any questions so far? Trying to take fewer polls, but I just got to do a quick pulse check. Okay. If you are lost, please say so. Okay. Okay. Thank you for your candor. I appreciate it. Okay. Okay. Let me end the poll, share the results. So any questions about anything? Or do we need me to go over anything again? Okay. Oh, Tyler, what's up?
Yeah, sorry, I pulled the trigger on that a little late. So components are for things that are going to be constant on the page. Is that what I'm understanding?
Good. Thank you. Yeah. So the way I look at the way I understand the way the platform makes a distinction between views and components is the views are basically things we're going to route to. So if it's something that is actually something the router will take us to, it goes in the views folder. Okay. So Christian, is that right? Am I understanding it right?
Yeah, routes point to views. I'd say that generally think about views as like it's a representation of an entire page of the wireframe, right? Like it's the whole page of the wireframe. That is one view generally. And then the components are the building blocks for those views, right? Like a view is often made up of multiple different components, right? And so, you know, a component should never really be a representation of the, like, in the components folder, component should be a representation of the whole page. It should be some subsection of the page that's got like some local state, or it's repeated a bunch of times, or right, something like that is kind of how we determine whether something should be made into a component. But view components are what our routes are going to point to, and they represent a page of our wireframe, basically.
Yeah. And the point really, this is the way Coding Dojo teaches it, right? But there's no real strong opinions as to how you set it up, right? This is one way to do it. It's not necessarily the right way, right? There's different ways to organize your code, right? So you could have subdirectories within components. Right. So if you want to have like another directory for your nav bar and all your nav bar components are in there, you could set it up that way, right? There's no wrong, right? But let me just, Christian, am I right to put nav bar in here? Does that make sense?
Definitely, because
Okay.
yeah, we're not routing to navbar, right?
Right.
So
Okay. So let me make sure I'm following the platform right. Cool.
Okay, so just to make sure that I'm following that correctly, so let's be hypothetical for a second. So let's just say home had 2 or 3 different things that belonged in it. The things in home would live in components, and then we would call them into home, and home would be the route, right? Because in theory, if we wanted like a recipe card to be called across multiple views, we could make one component and then call it across however many views we needed to.
That's my understanding. Yeah. Yeah. So we would have like in views, we would have home. Like if we're going to render a create, we'd put our form in home, right? Or if we had like a, just it really depends on the situation and what we're rendering, what we're viewing, right? So I personally would say if I'm going to make a create, I'm going to put my form in views. Okay. Is that right, Christian?
I mean, it depends on if that's going to be a reusable form, right? Are you
Mhm.
reusing that form between create and update, right? They're very similar forms.
True.
So often you would, I mean, again, it depends on how you're implementing it, right? If you're not doing a reusable form and you're just making a new form for create and a new form for update, then yeah, you could just do that all directly inside the view. But it's generally a good idea that if we recognize you've got similar code in different places, that's a component, right? So
Cool. Yeah.
it just depends on your design choice.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Thank you.
One thing, okay, so this would definitely be like if we wanted to show, right? If we wanted to view a single recipe, right? I would call it like show or recipe or whatever makes sense to you. I would just think in terms of like I'm showing a recipe, so I would call this like show.jsx or show recipe.jsx, right? Because we're going to link to a recipe's individual page, so that would be something we're linking to, so it would be a show recipe. Does that make sense, Tyler? Does that answer your question? Okay, cool. Any other questions? Okay, let me just get home working and then we'll break for the morning. So I want to be able to get my recipes here, right? I want to be able to display them in my home component. Okay, so we did this yesterday. I want to make a call to my API from my home component and get my list of recipes into this component. Okay, so what do I need to do if I'm making network calls or a database call or an API call? What do I need to import?
First, you have to import Axios and use effect.
There you go. Nice. So let's do use effect. And Axios. Oops. Cool. So inside of my home component, I'm going to use the use effect hook. use effect takes a callback function and callback function and a dependency array. Okay, if I just leave this blank, then it's only going to call use effect one time. It's not going to loop over and over again. Okay. So for my Axios call, oops, sorry about that. Axios dot get, because I'm making a get request. And I'm making the get request to my API, right? So I'm going to take, I want to get, this is the data that I want. So I'm going to reference this API, right? Or this endpoint. Okay. This is what I'm going to be making my Axios call to get this data. Okay. So I'm going to paste that here. Need the trailing slash, I don't think. Okay. I'm going to say dot then. Data arrow function. Let's just console.log the data. All right, see if it's working. So go back to my application, open up the inspect tools. All right, I should have had this open before, so I apologize. Shame on me. I'm going to go to my console, close this, and I'm getting my data. So I've got my hamburgers and stroganoff. Okay. What do I do with it now that I'm accessing it with Axios? What do I do? How do I get it to where I can render it on my page? So this step. I have data that may change, right? I have data that's going to be updated. Where do I put that?
Use state.
There you go. There you go. So use state. So I need to define my state. So const use state returns an array. Not use effect. Use state. I'm going to name my state something that makes sense, right? So I'm getting a list of recipes. So I'm going to call it recipes. And then the setter is just set recipes. What should my initial state be? What am I getting back from my Axios call?
An array.
Yeah, so my data is an array. So I want to have my initial state be an array. And I need to drill into this further. Right now I'm getting this object. I want to get my data, right? So let's set up state first. So that's going to be an empty array. And I call this data. Let me call it something else so it's not confusing. I'm going to call this res. Okay. So if I refresh my page, now I've drilled down into the object and I'm getting to this object. I want to pull off this key, right? Because this data key is what holds the data that I'm looking for as a value, right? So this is what I'm really concerned about right here. So I want to drill in further and get to this array. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So in my use effect, I'm going to make sure that I'm drilling in far enough where I get to the data that I want, because I want this, right? So when I log my data, I want this to be my new state. So this is what I want to set state to. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. So how do I get that in my state? So I have my set state, my set recipes, right? I want to set my recipes to what I'm console logging, right? So this is what I'm console logging. I want that to be my state, this array of objects. Okay. So what I'm console logging, I want in my state. So I'm just going to replace console log with set recipes. Okay. So to make sure it's working, I'm going to console log my recipe, my recipes. Okay, so now I can see I console logged on line 6, console logging my recipes. So that's what I'm getting here. So my recipes are now in state. So now I want to access them and display them on the page. Okay, so my recipes is an array of objects. How do I reach in and get each object and display it?
Would you do recipes.mat?
There you go. Yeah. So I'm just going to put an H1 in here just so we can already see recipes. And then exactly, I want to map over my recipes. I'm going to be putting JavaScript into my JSX. So I need to have the curly braces. And I'm going to say recipes.map. And map takes a callback function, which is each recipe. And I can also use an index. Okay. Make an arrow function. Actually, I'm gonna, yeah, that's fine. So I have each recipe has a title, description, ID, all this stuff. So let's go for the title. I want to be able to get the title out of this recipe. So what would I need to do inside my map to get to that title?
Recipes.title.
Okay.
No, I keep going to dot notation.
You're right. You're right. So
Recipes, oh, okay.
yeah. So let me see if I can do this. I don't know if this is going to work. We'll see. It does. Okay. So each time through, I've got my recipe, right? So recipe each time through is just this object. If I want to pull off the description, I was sorry, I was going for the title. So if I pull off the title, now I'm getting hamburgers and stroganoff. Okay. So now all I need to do is, if I'm writing it like this, if I'm using this syntax, I need to return. And I'm still going to do let's just do a div for now. And we'll do like I don't know, H3. And I want this, when I'm console logging, to appear in the H3. So again, I just use my curly braces, recipe.title. Okay, and then I get hamburgers and stroganoff. Okay. Any questions? Any points of clarification, any issues anybody's having? Is it making sense? Okay. Tyler, you're my indication. You're my thermometer. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop there. It's been an hour. I don't want to throw too much at you at one point. After the break, we're gonna go through. I might set up some Bootstrap over the break, just in the interest of time. I hope everybody goes okay with that. But just to get it looking a little bit more functional, I might just add some Bootstrap just so it's a little prettier, easier to see. Cool. Let me stop recording.